All right, so I'm trying out this new Facebook page for our group. It is a closed group, probably to help us communicate much at a rapid pace than it is looking for thousands of emails that we all receive. I get a, I have two emails accounts, one with the city and one with the Fort Worth ISD, and then I have my personal email. So I get a lot of emails. A lot of it's junk, but I can understand that. But there are some people in our class who does not have Facebook, and that's fine. And there's reasons behind it. Why people don't have it. They just don't care about having the social media stuff or whatever reason. I don't care. Just know that if you don't have Facebook, then I'll still send emails like normal. So um, October 1st, thought we would start off with a great story. Does anybody know what this story is about right here? Y'all, y'all would know about this story if you read your books, because it's in your books. I'm just kidding. I mean, it is, but no, my wife calls it passive aggressiveness. Aggressive. Aggressive, not a passiveness. This has a little bit to do with our lesson. This is actually biblical here, but I thought it'd be cool to read it since it's October 1st. Just kind of fell into that. And y'all can just listen to this. We have talked about this young man and the head that's on the platter here. If you ever wonder where that term comes from, I would think this from this story. So let me read it right quick. That was quick. You look better too. All right, so this is still in the book of Mark, and I'm just going to read it right quick for you. This isn't really our true meat and potatoes today, but it has something a little bit to do with it. So King Herod heard about it, talking about our basically the 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 disciples have casting out demons and stuff. So because Jesus' name had become well known, some said John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that's why miraculous powers are at work in him. But others said he's Elijah. Still others said he's a prophet, like one of the prophets from long ago. When Herod heard of it, he said, John, the one I beheaded, has been raised. And we're not going to get into the details of that. So just follow along. It's not confuse you, but just we're here for the horrific story of this. For Herod himself had given orders to arrest John and chain him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Let that sink in for a minute. He married his brother's wife. So Herodias held a grudge against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not. So Herodias is King Herod's wife. Okay? But she wasn't allowed to kill John the Baptist. But she could not because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing he was a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard him, he would be very perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. So the question is, what would we do for our kids? Okay, would we go this far? You ready for this? An opportune time came on his birthday. when Herod gave a banquet of his nobles, military commanders, and the leading men of Galilee. When Herodias' own daughter came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. The king said to the girl, "Ask me whatever you want, and I'll give it to you." He promised her with an oath, "Whatever you ask me, I will give you up to half my kingdom." She went out and said to her mother, "What should I ask for?" And John the Baptist's head, she said. At once she hurried to the king and said, "I want you to give me John the Baptist's head on a platter immediately." Although the king was deeply distressed because of his oaths and the guests, he did not want to refuse her. The king immediately sent for an execution and commanded him to bring John's head. So he went and beheaded him in prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When John's disciples heard about it, they came and removed his corpse and placed it in a tomb. Well, in theory, I would think so. But there is your nastiness story for October 1st. Okay. But this young lady was probably, I would say, 11 or 12 years old. King Herod was hoping she would be like, "Yeah, give me half your kingdom." No. Mom wanted the head. And so they got it. There's a lot more gruesome to that, but I'll leave it alone. Here's another ghost story. These are just for fun, okay? Morning. Morning. Okay. And if you guys want to get up and get I just cooked some eggs. Okay. Well, there's eggs there. I didn't put any salt, pepper, nothing. They're just plain eggs. And there's salt and pepper there. Okay, the next ghost story here. Some of you may already know this one. Maybe. But it's interesting to read this story. You know, this is not the story where Jesus walked on the water and Peter came out and, "Hey, I want to be out there and drowning." You know, most of us know that story. This is kind of a different story. So immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. After he said goodbye to them, he went away to the mountain to pray. Well, in the night, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. He saw them straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Very early in the morning, he came toward them, walking on the sea, and wanted to pass by them. So, imagine, or try to, which I haven't figured out why, but Jesus is walking on the water, and he's passing by the boat. He's not going to the boat, he's passing by. Kind of like, I guess, to see if they recognize him. So anyway, he wanted to pass by them. When they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke with them and said, "Have courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. They were completely astounded because they had not understood about the loaves. Instead, their hearts were hardened. Okay, that's a whole different story. So there's another ghost story. Seeing a ghost walking on the water, and then they walk right up to your boat and get in the boat. I think I would be terrified myself.
Jumping out.
Yeah. So hopefully y'all enjoyed those two ghost stories for the month of October. But our meat and potatoes will be here in Mark 7. If y'all want to turn your Bibles or phones or whatever, those might have memorized this. That is not me. chapter 7, verse 24. And I want to read, we're going to split this up in two sections. Hopefully I can get through both of them today and go from there. So he got up, 7 verse 24. He got up and departed from there to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it. But he could not escape notice. Instead, immediately after hearing about him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth. She was asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, because it isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she replied to him, "Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." I'm sure everyone else has a thinking about their own table right now. I know I did. Then he told her, "Because of this reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." When she went back to her home, she found her child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. So I sent this question out to you guys, and hopefully y'all are thinking about it. And you could share if you want. If not, I understand. But when have you felt like an outsider? Is there a time in your life that you felt like hey, oh, was that door locked? Sorry. When in time in your life have you felt like an outsider? And how did it make you feel? So while you're thinking about that, I'll tell you a story that happened this week at school. We have a young lady who's probably 15 years old. She's a paraplegic, wheelchair bound. Great young lady. She's definitely got some smarts to her because my school only has honors classes and AP classes. But she has to rely on wherever her wheelchair can go. And I've never had to deal with this, ever. And so it's created some challenges for me to actually learn a lot of things. Like, first of all, can she get from point A to point B to her classes without any issues? So in the meantime, I've got to figure out how to keep my school secure. So I created a pass for her so she can get into the right doors. It's not the same doors as everyone else can go in because it goes upstairs. She has to have a key to get up certain elevators, and she has to leave class early to get to class on time. I mean, there's a lot of feelings of isolation, being separated from others. I can't imagine how that feels, and maybe she's gotten over it because she's been a paraplegic all of her life. So, and here we are in high school, right? So I can imagine what she really feels. Well, this week, so she has to have a special bus to pick her up, and she's not a very light girl. She's a very heavy girl with a very expensive electric chair, and those things. The chair alone weighs 500 to 600 pounds. Well, they get to the school before school starts, and the lift to bring her down doesn't work now. The hydraulics are done. And I didn't know about this until maybe 30 minutes into it. They finally called me down. The administration was out there. The nurse was out there. She doesn't like the nurse. That's a whole different story. Anyway, they called me down, and I go out there, and you can hear her screaming from that school bus. And I'm like, what is going on? And they told me what I just told y'all, and I feel horrible. Like, I can't imagine. We're in front of the school. School has started, and I'm sure everyone that's on this side of the row in classes where the windows are can see what's going on. So they try to get another bus out. Now we got two buses out there. Well, the problem is we can't get her out, so we got to figure out something else. and I'm kind of upset with the bus barn. So finally, I just went in the bus and I said, Janae, I got you. We'll figure this out, okay? And she's in tears. I said, this is not the way this day should have started for you. It just felt bad. I just can't imagine how she feels isolated. And so to make it worse, to actually work things. So schools have policies. Our we have policies that only allow us to lift so much weight. So I had to call the fire department. And of course, fire department, man, I can't tell them to whisper to come up. It's like lights and sirens, like loud hell. Hey, we're here. They want everyone to know, and I didn't want that. And I know they didn't know the situation, so I'm not really blaming them. So now we got the fire department out there, 2 buses, all this crowd out there, and now they have to lift this young lady out in the back now of the bus and then step her down. Her mom is there now and just frantic, and then we set her down, finally get her in her chair, and she's in tears. And I'm telling everybody, I said, I want everyone to create a line right here so no one can see over here. I don't want the kids to see. And once we got her down, we got her to the other bus, got the lift up, and got her on the bus, and we sent her back home. That's what she wanted. That's what mom wanted. And before she left, she demanded that I'm there every morning when she gets there, because it takes them. They're usually about 20 minutes late to school, which she's not driving, so it's not her fault, right? Um, and so, yes, ma'am, I'll be here. And I said, I'm sorry I wasn't here in the first place. I said, as a matter of fact, here's my number. Well, she has my cell phone number. When you get here or get close, let me know so I can come out here. Okay. If I can't, I'll have someone come out here. But just the isolation, feeling separated, and this story here is isolation, and we'll talk more about that. But now I've shared that story. Is there a time in y'all's life that y'all have felt isolated?
I would say after my divorce, I felt isolated from my family for making that.
Is it a moment because is it something that played on your mind that they had separated you, or did they truly separate you?
Oh, they truly separated all of them. Because at the time, the friends that I did have were, I would say, very and perfect. And so I didn't fit into their. And then, of course, I did.
So,
Unfortunately, that happens with divorce. It's in the bad part is I went through that when I was like you guys.
yep, I felt like that with my own kids when I went through my divorce, because I wouldn't tell them much. They wanted answers, and I wouldn't tell them because any answers I gave them, I didn't want them to feel any different from anybody that was a part of that. That's tough decisions we have to make. Um, Anybody else?
When we first started coming, there are groups here. And I think that's what took us so long. For a while, I was like, what are these? Also in our neighborhood, he'll probably disagree. I feel like a huge outsider. The neighborhood we came from, we were super close. The neighborhood we are in now, they were all close. And I see pockets of they have parties. It's such a lonely, not a good feeling. Because in other things that we do in our lives, we're not outsiders. So for me,
I agree. And that's not why we're moving. And I'm glad you brought that up because we, I grew up in a Baptist church. What's the one of the things that they do during a service? They do the handshaking and greeting and stuff like that.
Used to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I talked to Pastor about that a couple of months ago.
He canceled it before COVID.
No.
So I was like, we got to bring that back. He goes, I agree. We just have to figure out how to do that safely. I was like, okay. But we were here for a couple of years, and we didn't really get greeted by many people. We didn't. I said many. There were a few that did reach out, and so I got to questioning whether or not we belonged here, and it's sad. I try to go out of my way now when I see someone that's new in the area that I sit in. I know I should branch out, but I don't. That we sit in that I actually say, hey, how's it going? How's the weather? Type conversations. We've had a few people walk in the door like that. And it's a tough thing to do. It is. But I don't want anyone to feel that way when they walk into our church doors feeling isolated. I don't want that to happen. I don't want to be the reason why they don't. I don't want to be the reason why they leave. I want to be the reason that they stay. I don't want them to feel isolated. Because anyone that comes through these doors that know anybody, you don't know what they just came from. They need us badly. We need each other really badly. That's why we're here. So, I hope, Mandy, that we're not the judgmental Christians that you saw, that you dealt with.
When we were walking up the stairs, I actually said, "No, I'm the church."
And there are some here that are judgmental. They exist here, but at least they exist here in sin and not out there causing more problems, I guess. I try to think of the glass half full. Sometimes you're not. Is that ready? Food? Yeah, if y'all want to eat, please eat. If not, they get thrown away afterwards.
We'll go to the children. What pleases one person?
So in light of our October, we're going to talk about 2 stories, and the way the time is running, we'll probably just talk about one. But I hope you enjoyed these views.
Oh, no.
There is that new movie. There's a new movie coming out.
Exorcist.
Yeah.
Oh, I love Halloween. Yeah, no.
So looking at this picture on the right, so we're talking about 2 stories, the deaf and mute man and the demon-possessed child. And of course, we just read about that situation. Imagine now this woman feels like an outsider. No one wants to be around, okay, here's the question. Do you have someone in your life or a family that you're like, man, I really don't want to invite them over because their kids are definitely demon-possessed? No, we don't feel that way about Hazel.
My cousin
You don't live
has
with
like that. Yeah, they've gotten better.
It's a,
Yeah, you said that before. I was like, family events.
Oh, yeah, we'll go
Yeah.
to your house.
Okay, so he got up and departed to the region of Tyre. Jesus, he tried to sneak away into a territory where he wasn't well known yet, and we'll explain that here in just a minute. Almost as far, okay, so I know you guys can't probably see this map up here. So a lot of his ministry is around here at the Sea of Galilee, but he finds himself going this direction towards Decapolis, And he sneaks away about 35 miles away from the ministry he just had because he wanted to get away where he wasn't known yet. But yet, as we read, obviously someone recognized. And and what's funny is my son, he can't stand to go with my oldest son. He can't stand to go to the stores with me. I don't know if this happens to you guys.
I'm not allowed to go to the store.
Too loud. Morning. So what? It seems like every place I go to, I know somebody, and he just can't stand to go because he wants one mission: go there for whatever I have reason to go in there and then leave. But I always find someone. Has anyone gone to almost a different state? Vacation.
I have a better one than that. My cousins are from England, about an hour north of London. And my brother was on a cruise, and they actually met a guy that carpools with my cousin in the middle of the Caribbean Ocean.
I mean,
So yeah.
they just have. It's weird.
Mm-hmm.
It's really weird. And hopefully none of y'all have ever experienced where you end up bumping into an old fling, right? It would be very bad that you show up at the same place in different state. That's another story.
Sounds like a real story, right?
So as we continue on,
I love awkward. I love that, seriously.
let's make sure y'all are paying attention. So anyway, he hates going with me because every time I go somewhere, I bump into somebody. And I can't just say, hey, how's it going, and move on. It's always, we're going to have a conversation because I genuinely like to talk to people and hear their stories, see what's going on in their life. And now, am I going to remember that story the next day? Probably not. But I really like to know what's going on. But it's that interaction that I love face to face. On Facebook, I take it with a grain of salt because really what's going on Facebook is not the reality of what's going on in your personal life. That's just how I feel. And so I just like that face to face. Anyway, it's hard to go anywhere, especially if you're Jesus, 35 miles away from where your ministry totally was around into a Gentile territory. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. So verse 25, it says, instead, immediately after hearing about him, a woman whose daughter had an unclean spirit came and fell at his feet. He's trying to get away, take a break. A Gentile woman with a demon-possessed kid, begged him for help. The laughter, when you have those kids, you're like, man, I need a break. No, this was a bigger problem. I want to show this picture again because they didn't get to see it. Help you with your dinner or your breakfast.
You're freaking Susan out.
Right?
Oh.
Yeah, thank you. And y'all missed the other ghost stories. Anyway, this is not the actual girl that the daughter is one I found on the internet. You're welcome, Susan. So, verse 26. The woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she was asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. So this woman was a Gentile, not Jewish. Okay. Up to this point, Jesus had been ministering predominantly in regions dominated by Jews. And we'll get to that here in a minute. She was a Syrophoenician, a Roman province of Syria. So Syro, Syria, okay? And she was a Phoenician woman, okay? So they just, Syrophoenician. Just cool to say it. Once you figure out how to say it. Took me a while. A woman wasn't allowed to speak to another man, okay? Only through her husband. This woman, as far as we know, didn't have a husband. And she was speaking to an outsider on top of that. That's a lot of reasons for her to not come up to a Jewish man, especially or much less a Jewish rabbi. So she put a lot on the line for her daughter. As a matter of fact, remember when we read Mark, Mark is more of a to the point, here's the story, let's move on. He just likes the meat and the bread. Okay? So I'm going to turn to Matthew right quick, and he likes to put in the mustard and ketchup and all that. So, but this is quite interesting to know what Jesus did during this time. Because there was much more that went on during this time. See, Matthew 15, 21, 23, y'all just listen here. When Jesus left there, he withdrew to the area of Tyre, like we just read, and Sidon. Just then, a Canaanite woman, a Gentile woman from the region, came and kept crying out, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely tormented by a demon." Jesus did not say a word to her. He ignored her, completely ignored her. Okay, Mark didn't say that. He just ignored her. And then the disciples approached him and urged him, please, to send her away. Send her away. Because she keeps crying out to us. He replied, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That's very important, okay? He replied, I was sent out only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, which are Jews. Okay? She was a Gentile. He ignored her. Completely ignored her. Why do you think Jesus ignored her? Already knew what? But why not just talk to her and not just ignore her? Bless you. Anybody on that? Anybody else on that?
I always kind of thought he was making a point in front of the crowd that he was with. Being Jesus, he knew exactly how the situation was going to turn out, but I think he was kind of taking a gamble of, these people expect me to ignore her. I'm going to ignore her. Let's see how that goes. I'm going to reject her. Let's see how that goes. He knew how it was going to go. So I probably dead wrong on that. Impression in front of the crowd that he was with.
Maybe teaching a lesson to his disciples. They were standing right there, right? So why am I only going to preach to? I've been telling you all along, I'm here for the people, not just the people. I'm here for all people, right? So there's a lot of theories behind that. I don't think he really meant to ignore her. He had a point to whatever the reason why he ignored her. So there you go, Susan. Don't worry, it gets worse. Anyway, so in verse 27, okay, he said to her, let the children be fed first, because it isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Jesus responds by using a parable. Without explaining what he's talking about. I was talking to my oldest daughter about this, and she took it face value. Does anyone understand this, what he's saying here? It's okay if you know. That's it. That's exactly it. So I don't get. Jesus responds by using a parable. He begins by envisioning children sitting at the table for mealtime. Jesus drew a simple word picture that provided him an opportunity to help her so she could grasp his messianic purpose. But being a woman in much need, she understood it better than the 12 men standing around. I'm not shocked, but I will say that's what happened. Is you had the 12 disciples who's been traveling with Jesus and seeing miracles. They have performed miracles themselves, and a woman comes along and actually understands the parable. No shock, right? You're welcome, women. That's for y'all. Correct. So the children are the Jews. That's who he's talking about. Back in the day, Gentiles were considered dogs. They were called dogs. It was actually a normal thing for them to be called dogs, and it no longer was it was almost accepted, like, okay, we get it. Because they were outsiders. They actually, their god was Baal. They had idols that they were worshiping. Okay, and there's more to that, but that's what he was talking about. Okay, and so I love what he responds, but actually I want to pass on. So in Romans 1, it talks about how Jesus is there for the Jews and the Gentiles, but the Jews first. Okay, remember through his ministry, Jesus is teaching where most of the time? In the synagogues, in churches. He's teaching to the rabbis. Why would he teach to them first and not outsiders first? If they're the root of, if everyone's supposed to thrive off of what they're teaching, you might as well get them to figure it out first, to teach them the gospel and understand it first, so they can disperse it the correct way, not outside in. I mean, it happens. You do have employees that know the job better than the supervisors, right? It happens a lot. But Jesus was starting with them first. Thank you. That's a dramatic introduction to this next one. Ordinarily, Jewish people refer to Gentiles as dogs in a belittling and insulting way. Jesus was emphasizing that he cared for the Gentiles. However, his primary attention on guiding the people of Israel to embrace him as Messiah. So in 28, but she replied to him, Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. The woman wasn't insulted. It just allowed her to share her faith and understanding of his mission. More specifically, the grace of Jesus is more than big enough to go around. She implied that his messianic mission to Israel could also be reached to Gentiles too. Okay, so the little pups, the children needed to be fed. So then any crumbs that fall off that they teach can go to the others that are around them. Okay, the dogs. Okay, I hate to call them dogs. I'm just telling you how it says in the scripture. Okay, I didn't make it up. Don't get mad at me. Okay.
There's an interesting correlation there that I think I think it's a Levitical law, but it talked about when you are harvesting your field, stuff that falls off the gleanings, they weren't allowed to pick them up because that was reserved for poor people. That was you weren't supposed to go pick it up, you're supposed to leave it. And so his correlation was almost exactly, only instead of saying poor people, because he talked about the poor all the time. He said the dogs, and guess what? She finished it for him like he knew he would. The crumbs fall off the table. Are you allowed to pick up? No. That is exact. So he's basically saying, my ministry is here for you. But guess what? The overflow, there's plenty of overflow. You're not allowed to suck it up and keep it for yourself. I think they would have certainly caught that correlation.
Yeah.
Crumbs.
So just remember, he thinks more of these women than he does these men. He spends more time with these men to figure it out than he does women. Okay. I'm not trying to get brownie points. I'm just pointing it out, the truth, the gospel here. So, and then verse 29 and 30, then he told her, because of this reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. When she went back to her home, she found her child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. Jesus responds with, your faith has saved your daughter. So, in y'all's world, who are your Gentiles? Anyone have those? We all do. You just got to figure out who those are. Who are your Gentiles? Do you have any Gentiles in your life? Your brother? Operation.
His son calls me on the phone and says, "Where's the effing key to the piece of equipment?"
And the Gentile reference here too is who are the outsiders? Sometimes we're the outsiders as well. But we do have some outsiders, family. I've got a cousin who is a registered sex offender for an issue that I believe he didn't even do, but he had his attorney told him to plead guilty because putting him on the stand because he stutters would show that he wasn't very confident, and they would put him away for 30. So he said, "Okay, then I'll say guilty." But now he has to live. Well, now because of the era in his life, he's doing things like, well, I'm an outsider, no one cares about me anyway, so now he does bad things. He's sitting in jail right now. Some of us have family members like that. And some of them, they've tried real hard to change and not be an outsider anymore. Do we give them that opportunity? I'm not saying that you're going to forget what they did, but you can forgive the sin. Because if you can't forgive their sin, then why do you think your Lord and Savior is going to forgive your sin? Sometimes we have family like that. We have Gentiles in our life. Anybody else on that one?
Quite frankly, she was married to another woman at our work. She was walking by, we were talking about Wednesday, and I was going to church that week. Oh, those churches, they don't want me there. And I remember her saying that. They don't want my kind of people there. And as I was driving home, I'm like, I can't just let that go. But that was, and I called her back and I said, no, that you're exactly the person that they want. But that's a good example. You're sinful, you're lost in your sin. No, absolutely incorrect. If you are a living, breathing human being, we do seem to categorize people as too far gone, not church. Clean, nice, tidy.
Yeah.
We had a female couple fire, and who knows what happened to them. I guess they were pushed away. Who knows? No longer here before y'all came. Probably before y'all too. It's kind of sad.
I'm sure it makes it hard for us not to judge people like that. Very hard. Like, how can you come to church with those sins in your life? Well, if you really think about that question, then you say it in the mirror, then you're like, oh, I'm actually talking about myself. So the second half of this story, I'll go ahead and move into it right quick. So, in Mark 7:31, I'll read it all the way through. Again, leaving the region of Tyre, he went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, to the region of Decapolis. Once again, he's in Decapolis. Now he's going to try to go back through there. And in order to, why would Jesus and his disciples go through a Gentile nation to go back to where he needs to go? I'm not putting out clues out there, but so they were scared of Herod. They were scared of this. And y'all missed the story. Sorry, the ghost stories. This is John the Baptist's head on there, and that ghost story. Anyway, so they went through the Gentile nation where he wasn't well known yet to escape this. This right here. He wasn't scared. The disciples were. His time hadn't come yet. Okay. Anyway, okay, moving on. So we don't know who they are yet. I'm sure they're close friends or family. They brought to him a deaf man who had difficulty speaking and begged Jesus to lay his hand on him. So he took him away from the crowd in private. After putting fingers in the man's ears and spitting, he touched his tongue. Why would he put, first of all, his fingers in his ears? This man is deaf, so he puts his fingers in his ears, right? You want to know why? You want to ever have to deal with the deaf people? Vibrations. You can actually. It's kind of like if you're underwater and you can't really hear anyone have a real conversation, but you can kind of pick up their tones. And well, he put his fingers in his ears probably because they can pick up those tones. Okay, and then so he took him away from the crowd, and then and spitting, he touched his tongue. So, from what we understand, he didn't spit in the guy's mouth. He spit on his hand and touched his tongue. So, anyone know the history behind that? There is a history to that. There was created the mud. Yeah. In this situation, back in the day, they figured it to be kind of like a healing, that if someone spit on their hand and touched their tongue, they kind of understood what they were trying to do. So it was a representation of something they've done before. Yeah, don't touch my mouth after you spit on it, okay?
No, next time you're sick.
Hey, you know what? If it'll heal me, brother, you go ahead.
You got it.
Well, this is Jesus, the purest of the pure.
Yep. Yep.
And also it was something about the spittle of the firstborn.
Okay.
My great-grandfather who came from Norway, a Norwegian, he died when he was 95. I can remember we would go to his house, and I remember being stung by a bee one time over there. Come here, and licked his finger, put it on me. My spittle, it'll cure it.
Did it?
Yeah.
Was he weird? Was he a weird guy?
No, my dad still says that, okay?
Oh.
Spittle on the firstborn son. Whatever, Dad.
See, that'll forever haunt me now.
Yeah.
Really take that.
All right, verse 34. Looking up to heaven, he sighed deeply and said to him, Ephphatha. Ephphatha. This is, be opened. Immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak clearly. He ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more they proclaimed it, which we have seen and read about before. How difficult it is for you to tell others about what God has done for you. Sometimes it's actually tough, but something that dramatic, yeah, I'm going to tell everybody. They were extremely astonished and said, He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. What's the difference between what happened with the woman going to Jesus and the guy going to Jesus? What's the difference? Not necessarily that. Oh, wait, go ahead,
You
continue.
said it, like you said, it wasn't as common, and they weren't allowed back then. The standard.
I think these two stories are very important for us as a group to understand. If you keep, let me say it this way, the mother's faith healed her daughter, and the daughter didn't even come to Jesus. The friends of this man brought him to Jesus and was healed. Do our friends not have an influence in our lives to help us get through bad times? My friend's faith for the problems I'm going through will help me a lot better than me going through it by myself. These emails that I send out, now the Facebook group that we're in, and once again, if you don't have Facebook, that's okay. I'll still send out the same emails. But these are important for me because I want y'all to know if you have something going on, I want to pray for you because this right here solidifies the partnership that we have as a family, that we pray for each other.
Men, you said the men, his friends brought him. Definitely, the men brought the man on top of the roof and dug into the roof to lower their friend down to Jesus' house.
Mm-hmm.
The woman was by herself. The woman fell at Jesus' feet and touched his robe. She was by herself. The woman at the well, she was by herself.
So I want you guys, and that's right. Pretty sad, actually. But that was the times, too. But I want you guys, and there's more to a closing that I have here, but I think this is more important. Through our friendship and our family here, please don't go through what you're going through alone. Okay? I want to be here for you. I want to be an advocate for you if you're going through something. If I don't understand what you're going through, someone else here does. I'm trying real hard to know a lot of people in our church because, man, do they have stories. And there's certain people that will help you with certain things that I have no idea. Have no idea. We need to accept that we love each other, that we want to help each other out. We need to have enough faith in each other that they will pray for us. When I send out these prayer requests, I just ask for you to look at them and say them in a prayer, or just be very thoughtful and God-minded in reading them.